Hello everyone, welcome to the lecture 4 of the course Climate Change Extreme Events. So far in the previous lectures we have already covered what is exactly climate and weather. Then we have also discussed about what is climate, and then we have also discussed about how do we define climate change in a, let's say, a regional phenomena, or the global phenomena, or the local phenomena, like that, different parameters which basically responsible for these different changes. Then after that we have also discussed about what is climate change or the implications on climate extremes, how they are important to we have to prepare understanding about these different types of extreme events. What are those factors which are responsible for these different climate extreme events, and how they are basically responsible to affect overall socioeconomic or health hazards in different parts of the world. In the today's lecture, we will now particularly focus on types of climate extremes. So in this lecture 4, we will talk about what is exactly temperature extremes, and after that we will further go into further details of different types of extreme events, for example rainfall extremes, floods and droughts, etc. So this in this lecture we will talk about primarily the temperature extremes, which is heat waves or cold spells, or sometimes also called cold waves, and then what is their causes, what is their impacts, and what is their trends globally. So in this particular lecture we will cover these different topics, which is basically the definition of the heat waves and cold spells, cold waves, what is exactly the mechanism behind these different phenomena across the globe. Then we will also discuss about what is their societal and environmental impacts, and we will also examine historical and future trends in extreme temperature events, what is likely to be happen or has already been observed through different historical observations, like that. So first we will discuss about what is exactly heat waves. Heat waves are generally very common. If you heard about this particular terminology now these days, summer months we generally see that there are severe heat waves warning across different parts of the country, India specifically, or other part of the world as well. And it is very important to assess that what are those factors which is basically important to understand what is exactly the governing mechanism behind heat waves and their primary drivers, like that. So according to WMO and other international bodies, heat waves are defined as it's a prolonged period of excessive hot weather, often accompanied by high humidity, that significantly exceed the typical temperature for a particular region during that time of the year, which basically here because of mix of different phenomena, the temperature of a certain region has significantly increases above normal conditions, and therefore it sustained for that particular temperature for let's say number of days. That is particularly we define as heat waves. They can last from let's say several days to weeks, and typically defined based on the deviation from the average temperature. This is what is the definition of exactly what is heat waves. According to India Meteorological Department, we can classify heat waves in India based on different temperature thresholds. For example, when you talk about plains region, the maximum temperature reaches above let's say 40 degrees centigrade, and in the hilly regions if it is crossing 30 degrees centigrade threshold, then it can be considered as kind of a heat wave conditions. And if it kind of maximum temperature stays there for very prolonged days or period of time, that we define as the heat wave period for that particular regions, like that. So this is the overall definition of heat waves. There are several characteristics of heat waves. For example, as we just discussed, temperature thresholds, basically it defines what is the maximum temperature, where if the temperature goes above, it can classify as a heat wave depending upon the location of the area. For example, it could be plains, it could be mountainous regions like that. And what is the total duration where this particular heat waves sustains there in that particular region. Duration means for example, let us say if you draw a threshold above 40°, how many days the maximum temperature of that particular regions are above 40°, like that. Geographical extent, which of those regions which are affected by this phenomena, increasing temperature or maximum rise in the maximum temperature for over period of time. Then there is another important factor, which is the humidity level, because if you have higher humidity as well as the higher temperature at the same time, it can basically increase the discomfort level at one particular place or exaggerate the effect of heat waves in different parts of the world as well. Then there is a intensity, which means what is the sharp rise or maximum temperature of a heat wave in a certain location. And then there is a diurnal variation, which means what is the difference between, let us say, minimum and maximum, daytime temperature and nighttime temperature difference. That can basically also suggest what is the gravity or importance or severity of the heat waves in that particular region. Then there is a frequency and trends. Let us say how frequently that heat wave events are occurring in that particular region. Is they too frequent in the historical time record in the last few decades, or it is a very rare event like that, or is it a continuously rising trend, or it is continuously, let us say, stable more or less, or let us say it is not increasing at all, it is decreasing. So, these are the importance characteristics of how we can define heat waves in those areas. And the last is basically the impact on health. So, heat waves has a very significant impact on health. It can create multiple different disease, multiple different problems associated with the health. That is also very important to understand, or when we are dealing with some sort of heat wave events in different parts of the world as well. So, this is the figure which tells about the distribution of heat waves across different parts of the world. So, one is your Indian territory, Indian map, where it shows that the maximum temperature of May 24 to 30th May in 2015 and across different parts of the region, where the temperature in the darker shade of red color shows goes above 43.5 and can reach up to 49°C in those regions. So, here you can see that these are the time duration where it sustained to that particular level or even breached the threshold even further, or has higher intensity like that. And it is also showing the geographical extent of these heat wave events in 2015. So, now if you look at most of the northwestern region, particularly Rajasthan, Haryana, Punjab, or let us say the half part of Uttar Pradesh, including your western and eastern part of Uttar Pradesh as well, and primarily most of the region of the Madhya Pradesh and Maharashtra, Chhattisgarh, Odisha as well, are significantly impacted by this particular heat wave events across India. So, this is how basically we have classified the temperature data, and then we have drawn the data according to their different points, the location, and then we will be able to get an idea about how the heat waves has been propagated, or what is the total extent of heat waves across the whole different region of India. Even this particular heat wave event was also observed in neighboring countries as well. That is the shows the what is the overall geographical coverage covered by this particular heat waves. Then another example is European heat wave in 2003. Here you can see there are lots of countries situated in European region were affected by this heat wave event, and IPCC and other international bodies have also calculated the frequency of occurrences of these extreme temperature events, particularly for base period or observed period for 1969 to 1990, that is base period, and then they have compared what is the anomaly of, let us say, 2003 heat wave events in the European Union countries like that. So, here it is significantly suggesting that in 2003 there is the temperature, average temperature has been also increased, the frequency has been more or less same, but the value has been increased. However, if you look at extreme ends of this particular distribution, it suggests that the extreme temperature and their occurrences frequencies has been already also increased in European countries like that. They have also quantified future projections of these heat waves events in European countries like that, and in 2017 and 2100, which is far end of this century, scenario suggests that there is a highly likely that this kind of events will be more frequent, and therefore we have to be prepared for these types of heat wave events in European Union particularly. So, this is all about what is the geographical extent, what is the different characteristics, how we can quantify the heat waves like that. Now, if you ask me about what is the causes of heat waves, so here I am trying to explain what is exactly the causes of the heat waves. For example, heat waves generally originated from the high pressure system, which is also called blocking pattern, which plays a very significant role in the development of persistent or long term or many days are experiencing heat waves in a certain region like that. So, this high pressure system, a blocking pattern also called anticyclone, which is a kind of a large scale weather system characterized by descending air masses. This descending air masses suppresses the cloud formation, precipitation, and therefore it leads to formation of very clear skies, and therefore those areas are receiving intense solar heating during the day. So, if you look at here in this figure, it is basically these are the region where we have low pressure system are located. However, there is a region where we have a high pressure system are located, and because of the less cloud activity and all, we have a very high amount of solar radiation received during the day, and because of this high pressure system, the higher temperature air masses does not escape from this particular place, and there remains there for a very long period of time. That basically creates a heat wave anomalies in these particular regions like that. So, this blocking pattern are often considered as a very slow moving or stationary, and therefore because of very stationary nature and slow moving nature, the heat wave events propagate or stays there for a number of days for that particular regions like that. Here you can also see that example of how this heat waves generates in a one particular region. So, for example, because of this high pressure system, we developed a very intense heat events in a certain region, and if the air masses above is basically the temperature increases, and because of the nature of the air masses is descending, which means the air is not able to, the hot air is not able to escape from that particular dome. Therefore, it basically creates or propagates that effect more further. For example, if you talk about several different region, Europe, so this is blocking patterns have very common, and that is basically has created a very worst European heat wave events such as 2003 or very recent like 2022 events like that. North American region, this is also very important issues that basically led to intense heat waves and wildfires. And Asia, particularly in India, pre-monsoon heat waves are often exaggerated by this stationary high pressure system. So, this is the primary reason behind heat wave generation in a particular region. In a summary, I can there are three points which are important to understand, that is prolonged heat, which is basically because of the clear skies allows the ground to heat up very quickly significantly during the day, and with little or no cooling at night due to lack of cloud cover. Then there is a stagnant conditions, blocking patterns trap warm air in the lower atmosphere, preventing the influx of cooler air masses, and therefore the air masses keep on rising, increasing the temperature. And there is a reduced winds, therefore light winds and high pressure system it is basically reduces the wind velocities and all, therefore, it further increases the overall impact of heat waves in a different regions. So, this is a very simple example which we can understand about how basically this heat waves can be generated in a certain location and different parts of the world as well. Then there is another stressors which can also act to propagate this effect further. For example, if you talk about reducing the forest cover, which means if you reduce the forest cover, there is less evapotranspiration and therefore less latent energy and therefore more sensible heat in those areas. So, particularly if you talk about sensible heat, it is the heat which is we can sense as their heat, but the latent energy is basically amount of energy which you gives to a certain matter, which basically converts its state from one state to another state. For example, the water can convert into vapor or the ice can convert into water because of the absorption of certain amount of heat, that is called latent heat. Sensible heat is that at that temperature the matter does not change their state, but it is basically increases the overall temperature of that certain air masses and nearby that region like that. So, if you have let us say more latent heat, which means it basically propagate the transformation of matter states one state to another state, but let us say if you reduce the forest cover, or then we basically decreases the overall evapotranspiration in that particular region, therefore, there will be little or less latent heat mechanism there, and that basically what happened, the extra heat which is we are receiving from the suns can basically increases the sensible heat in the air masses, and that basically further propagate the effect of heat waves in a certain region. So, therefore, it is very important to understand the mechanism behind the forest cover, the canopy cover or vegetation and their role on heat waves. So, you have seen that if you have more deforestation areas or the areas which we have lesser vegetation cover, those areas are more quickly heats up because of the heat waves or increasing temperature like that. But when you have the forest cover those areas where these areas are not that much heats up, because there is a possibility of more latent heat or latent energies there, conversion of water which are there in the transpirations transpiration or evaporation processes can convert water into vapor like that. Then there is a urban heat island effect, basically because of changes in the land use land cover characteristics. The temperature rises and therefore it creates a domes, and this domes height increases, the atmospheric boundary level also increases, and that is basically covering the large area surrounded by in a certain region which are affected by high heat events like that. So, these are some of the stressors which basically further modifies the effect or amplifies the heat wave impact in a certain region. So, this is all about heat waves. Now, we will talk about what is exactly cold spells or cold waves. Cold waves or cold spells is a period of marked unusual cold weather characterized by sharp and significant drop in air temperature near the surface. That can be your maximum, minimum or daily average. For example, if you are talking about large area, persistent below 5th percentile of temperature for a region at least for 2 consecutive days or more than that is considered as cold waves in that particular region. That is what WME has been suggested. So, basically it is a phenomena which is largely associated with the minimum temperature or low temperature. If it is goes below to the 5th percentile of your monthly precipitation values, that can be considered as a cold wave, or if it is persistent above for 2 days or more than that, it will kind of a cold spell or total duration of the cold spell like that. Similar to the heat wave, there are several characteristics of cold waves as well. So, it is a temperature threshold which is basically we used to classify any cold waves as a temperature or any cold events as a cold wave or cold spells like that. Then we basically calculate what is exactly the duration, at how many days the temperature consecutively are lesser than 5th percentile of a certain region like that. Then we also similar to the heat waves, we also talk about geographical variability, how many area is covered, seasonality, how frequent or is there any seasonal behavior of these cold wave spells, or it has been a very abrupt or very random behaviors like that. This has basically associated with the weather conditions. What is exactly the weather conditions, what is temperature, what is their cloud activities, wind patterns, like that, that will also sometimes affect the cold wave severity in those region. The cold wave has also very significant health impacts because of the low temperature, persistent days, and therefore that can cause multiple different types of health related issues like that. There are environmental impacts, for example, loss of vegetation covers or freezes, frozen lakes, therefore less availability of surface water, and all these activities has been slowed down because of lower temperature like that. There are economical and infrastructural disruptions. For example, water pipes has been frozen because of the low temperature, and there are several infrastructural activities has been also disrupted. So therefore, the cold waves can also impact the overall socioeconomic conditions across different parts of the world. This is a two example which tells about the cold spells across different region. So here there is a Siberian cold, extreme cold event which happened in 2023, which you can look at. There is higher latitude region where these regions are extreme suffered extremely low temperature, and therefore it is considered as an extreme cold wave condition in these high latitude region. There are also North American cold waves where we also observed a very significant drop in the temperature, therefore it's also considered to be a cold wave events happened in 2019. So what is the phenomena behind the cold spells? Basically, in the higher latitude region, particularly Arctic and all these regions, so there is a very high velocity winds are moving around, making a circle like that. That is basically called polar jet stream, and within this jet stream we have a stable polar vortex where the colder air masses are basically revolving around in that particular region like that. So it is concentrated in the Arctic or poles region because of the stable polar vortex phenomena. However, because of the disruption of these polar vortex, these colder masses of air shifts towards the more lower latitudes region, for example Northern American part or Canadian part, or let's say Siberian part or Russian region like that, and therefore it basically drops the temperature of those regions very significantly. And in addition to that, there is a snow ice feedback mechanism also works, because if you have, let's say, more ice, that can basically more sun's radiation will be reflected back to the atmosphere, and therefore Earth's temperature will further decreases because the heat is not absorbed by the surface of bodies like that. So this is primarily the phenomena of cold air outbreaks, and therefore it basically travels towards the mid latitude region and leading to cold waves in those regions. And there is also because of this effect there is a regional variability, and therefore these regions experience a severe cold and unusual warm weather displaced jet streams like those regions like that. So this is another example which tells about the meteorological phenomena which basically interact with your cold temperature or cold waves kind of events. For example, if we have a blankets of cloud in certain region, it's act like a blanket, and therefore it blocks the heat loss or heat release from that particular area and traps the heat in certain for that particular region like that, therefore prevents the cold wave conditions in that particular region. Let's say if you have windy conditions, it is also considered a mixing of air masses and energies and temperatures in different air masses like that, and it also prevents the heat escape from the surface or near surface air masses like that. But let's say if you have clear skies and calm winds are ideal for cooling, because when we don't have a blanket of clouds, we don't have a very high winds, therefore it can the heats of the near surface can quickly escape, and therefore can reduce the temperature of the ground, or near surface of the air masses of the ground can very quickly, and therefore decreases the temperature. Let us say if you have a snow cover in those regions, that basically further amplifies this cold wave effect because of the change in the albedo, the change in the land use land cover characteristics, and therefore it basically further allows the rapid heat loss, and therefore exaggerate the cold waves processes in that particular regions like that. So, this is all about, now we have talked about what is exactly heat waves, what are their mechanism, what are their characteristics. We also talked about what is exactly cold waves, what are their mechanism, what are their characteristics like that. Now, what is exactly the impacts of heat waves, for example, on different region. So, if you talk about the impact of heat waves directly affect the human beings, directly related to human health. Agricultural, there are several different types of impacts on agricultural system. For example, affect the crop productivity. It basically increases the higher mortality in new plantation. It is basically affect the kharif crops, rabi crops in regions. It also affect the rice production in significantly affected on those regions where rice are extensively produced, because the matching of same year months where the heat waves are very common. Then it is also a very significant can create a problem on livestock, livelihood, and there are several other hazards, for example, forest fires, or different types of forest hazards can be linked with the heat waves events as well. Then there is a several impacts of cold waves, for example, human health, which is basically caused by respiratory problems. There is skin problems, bone, joint and muscle problems. There are cold related injuries can also, for example, frostbite, hypothermia, and these are the few of the events which basically can increases the human health issues during the cold spells as well. We have also talked about the impact of cold waves on infrastructure, can damage road, bridges, power lines and telecommunication system. Economy, because of all these damages caused by cold wave system, basically can also damage the crops, horticulture, forest, trees and all. It is also basically affect the livestock, it is also affect the wildfire, wildlife, sorry, in some part of the world as well. So, this is one example about how the rise in the temperature has been reported in historical period since 1880 to 2020. If you look at, there are several international bodies which are reporting that temperature rise, and if you look at that, since 1980s the temperature keep on rising because of the industrial activities, agricultural expansion, all these kinds of human activities and all. So, this tells about, at the same time we are observing the heat waves more frequent in some part of the world, but at the same times we are also observing the cold wave phenomena is also happening at the same time. Therefore, these two types of temperature extremes are becoming more common due to changes in the climatic conditions across the world. This is another example of historical data set which tells about the regional or geographical coverage of these temperature extremes across different parts of the world. If you look at primarily if you look at, let us say there are annual hot temperature or these data set which basically tells that those regions which becomes more hotter, and there are several regions which becomes more colder because of the drop in the temperature like that. So, therefore, temperature extremes are also significantly affect the occurrences of heat waves in certain region. Temperature are crossing above certain thresholds for a number of days, and therefore affecting the overall socioeconomic conditions. And at the same time, climate change also affects the occurrences of cold waves in a certain region when the temperature falls below in a certain threshold for very long period of time, and therefore it can create more socioeconomic hazards in those particular regions like that. So, in this particular lecture we have covered what is exactly heat waves, what is exactly cold waves, and how we can simply define these two terminologies, and what is their different characteristics or critical climate extremes with significant impacts like that. Then we have also talked about what is their drivers in both natural process and anthropogenic factors which are responsible for amplifying the effect of heat waves and cold waves across different parts of the world. Then we have also discussed about the climate change and their effect, or how they are intensifying the heat waves and modifying the cold spell patterns across the world. Then we have also talked about several different types of impacts, and that is basically can suggest us to prepare for prepare for plans for mitigations for those extreme events in the future climatic conditions because of the change in the overall climatic behaviors. So this is overall the summary of the today's lecture, and we have covered primarily two types of temperature extremes, heat waves and cold waves. In the next lecture we will primarily talk about extreme precipitation events, particularly floods and droughts, and how they are what is exactly these two processes are, what are their different governing mechanism, factors, stressors like that. So this is the next lecture, lecture 5. We will talk about all these extreme precipitation events and characteristics. Thank you so much for your attention.